Well, I think, hold on, this is episode 14. Episode 14 of Conversations with the Community. We got Tim here from Denver. And Tim, you reached out primarily to talk about something I think it's going to be great because I get comments on this all the time about lyrics and focusing on lyrics and the music, and you should focus on the lyrics, and why don't you, or I'm sorry, you should focus on the music. And there's seems to be like this slight but constant debate on what you're supposed to pay attention to first and what's more important and all this other stuff. So go ahead and kick us off and we'll get rolling.
Yeah, so it's been cool kind of seeing your journey through hip hop in general and seeing the reason that I tend to like reaction channels, very much yours included, is to be able to see a perspective from someone who is different than me, listening to music maybe that I've heard before, but with a different ear, with different, things that you kind of pick up on first listen. And if anything, like I tend to listen to the music first, like just naturally. It's not even like a choice, just, that's what it happens. And if I'm hearing a voice, I'm hearing it more as an instrument, and like I can hear the words and I'll pick up on it. But if there's a whole story going on, I might not pick up on it I've listened to the song a few times. So I think then watching you go through it and listen to it, and you're like picking up on stuff like the very first listen. Like I listened to this 10 times and I had no idea that's what they were talking about. So it's not so much like a specific choice, but just kind of like seeing someone listen to the exact same music and take away something completely different starting out. But then to also see your progress a little bit now, picking up on the producers, picking up on the sound, and like there is a little more going on there than just like, oh, and this one person made all this music. So I think that perspective is kind of cool to see you work through that in just like the last couple months even.
Yeah, and I've been trying to do it specifically with the last one with Wu-Tang. I was really trying to pay attention because I had said on one video, like, I don't know who the producers are, and everyone was like, it's literally right there on Genius at the top. Like, how do you not see it? I was like, oh, my bad. So now that I know where to look, I've been trying to pay attention. Okay, who put this together? Who's making the music? Because that's still something I'm learning, and I know it's a big part of hip hop of who the producer is. But going back to what you were saying as far as my hitting the lyrics, I think something people are aware of, but they don't really necessarily fully consider is, I think when just the average person, the average listener puts on an album for the first time, you're in the car or you're at home or whatever. I don't think it's common for people to sit down, do nothing else, no phone, no distractions, nothing. Pull up the lyrics and sit and read the lyrics as they're going through it. So I think in a way, I don't know. I don't want to say it's misleading, but because I'm making my first listen just an active experience, it's a lot easier for me to pull meaning out from lyrics where, like, if I listen to a new rock album, I don't do that, which is kind of odd. I'll just put it on and listen to it. And then, it takes me 4 or 5 listens before I really get into the words and what they're talking about.
Yeah, active listening is definitely a lot different. I tend to listen to a lot of different music, whether it's like older stuff or like brand new stuff coming out. But because it's not my full-time job, obviously I've got to like be doing other stuff in the background,
right?
Listening while at work or cooking at home, stuff like that. So there definitely is a different experience between like, like this is one I want to sit down and listen to. If it's an artist that I already like, and it's like an album that's been anticipated, I'm more likely to like, okay, I'm not even gonna like listen to it now because I'm busy. I'm going to wait until this evening when I have the time and I can actually focus on it. So there definitely is that aspect of it, but it definitely takes me a little more effort. Like I've got to be sitting there like reading the lyrics or really paying attention to pick up on a lot of like the story side of things or what's being said, at least on the initial listens.
So it sounds like though there are albums where you do like a more of an active listen experience. What was the most recent album where you felt like you did that, where you just like, no, I'm going to take some time and listen to this and read it, and how's it going?
It's a good question. I know that there's been a couple of them pretty recently, and I think actually I first started watching you right around the time that you did Call Me If You Get Lost.
Oh, okay.
And that was one of them because like I've like learned with Tyler, especially in the last few albums, like there is something there. There's something to pay attention to. There's like a story to pick up on. So that was one of the last big ones. I'm sure there's probably been a few since then, but that's the one that kind of like comes to mind right away.
Okay. Yeah, that was a cool album too. That one, mm-hmm. I really have grown to appreciate Tyler and his music and what he does, but that reaction specifically, that's the only one where I've been drinking beer while I was doing it. And the reason why was I was so nervous because at that point I had not done a full album and I'd only really, done reactions to singles. And when you do singles, you go, okay, well, this is generally agreed upon to be a good song. And so you don't have to worry so much about not liking it. Cause that's always the biggest concern with a reaction channel is what if I don't like it, cause nobody really wants to see that necessarily. So I remember when that album came out and everyone was pushing it, like, oh, you got to do it. I just filled up my mug full of beer and I was like, well, because what if it's bad? What if I have to sit through a whole album and I don't enjoy it? Like that's going to be a hard experience. But fortunately,
right, especially as your first album.
Yeah, but fortunately, Call Me If You Get Lost was tremendous. I thought that was I think that's his best one. And I know that's kind of going out there a little bit. I would say just in terms of what Tyler has done musically and creatively, like that's the I don't want to say the peak, but like I feel like he's really getting all the pieces coming together on Call Me If You Get Lost.
Yeah. Yeah, and I tend to avoid like trying to do a whole lot of like ranking or like top 10 lists and stuff like that. I've kind of fallen into that. And there's definitely like that's been a thing in hip hop for ever since before I ever started listening to it, over 20 years ago. As far as like, oh, like who's the best and all of that, like that's the competition side of it. But where I start to feel like myself and other people kind of get locked in a little bit is like if you choose your top 3 or you choose your top 10, whether it's an artist or an album, well, what happens when a new one comes out?
Yeah.
Like what does it take to knock one of those other ones out?
Right.
Like, does it take away from one of those other ones, or is it more of just like, and that's also good? And so I think for me, like with Tyler, for example, like I think he's still getting better. I like seeing his like the progression of his work over time, whether it's like him maturing as a person or the music or who he gets to work to, but still kind of keeping that core, like what makes it his music. And I don't feel like I've come across an album where it's like, oh, that one kind of missed. Like he was doing so well and then he fell off. But you know, just like the next natural step. And I don't tend to like dig super into like interviews and all that stuff, but occasionally tuning in and seeing some of the ones that he did, after this most recent album, and like hearing some of like the energy that he has or like what's on his mind when when he's talking about certain things, as far as like you don't have to like there's no one right answer when it comes to music. There's no universal best. It's very subjective. There's almost nothing objective when it comes to that stuff. And if it's your favorite album, you're right.
Yeah.
And if it's not, if it's not for you, cool.
Yeah.
And so where I've kind of like found myself like almost like gatekeeping myself a little bit of like, why am I not allowing myself to like enjoy this? Like it sounds good and I like it. I don't have to compare it to the best album ever. I don't have to like, start, comparing everything to Kendrick, but just having that perspective of like, I enjoy this music for what it is. And then I enjoy this music for what it is, instead of like, no, this is better than that, or that's not the real stuff, or this isn't the good stuff, or you have to listen to that. Because I've experienced people telling me that, but I've also like caught myself like a little bit doing that to other people too, where it's like, oh, but you got to listen to this. Like, no, let me just like have a conversation, like figure out what you like and share something that I think you might enjoy, but not feel like, oh, I'm putting like all this pressure on you of like I caught myself doing that when I messaged you about J Dilla's Donuts. That's one of the albums that's like really one of my favorites, and at this point is a little bit cliche to like, but instead of like throwing everything at you and it's like, okay, well, to understand this you got to do this like 1 week course on why it's important. It's just like, just listen to it, and if you enjoy it, cool, dig a little deeper. If not, cool, and we'll move on, kind of thing. So more having that attitude for myself, and to make sure I'm not like bumming other people out when I'm talking about music.
Right. It is an interesting situation, because it seems to be born from good intentions, although I guess a lot of awful things are sometimes. But this idea of, this is such great music, incredible music. Every now and then, I don't do this a lot, but every now and then I'll get on and I will listen to an album I don't really like that much. And it'll even be an album that's not necessarily like their best album, a group's best album, whatever. And I'll put it on, not to like, not a sense of torture or anything like that, but I feel like it's important to explore, like you were saying, every album has its space. It all exists somewhere. You know, nothing's going to replace Dark Side of the Moon. Nothing's going to replace Good Kid, Mad City. Those are their albums. They exist in their space. And I feel like that's for every album. But you ever see those word cloud pictures where they take like an essay or something and the word that's used the most has the big circle and then the fewer words?
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of how I picture albums. Like the big, massive albums kind of have bigger space, but then there's, you know, little albums that are off to the side and they still exist. And I just feel like sometimes you got to go through and listen to stuff. And especially if it's been a while, every now and then when I go back to an album that I think, oh, I don't really care for this one, and I hear it again, I go, oh, it's different. Like it changes over time as your ear changes, your perspective changes, all of that stuff. And I don't know. I feel like people miss that opportunity to rediscover music again just because, oh no, it's below the bar, so it's not included, and then that's the end of it.
Yeah. It almost kind of reminds me of how a little bit like people will talk about when, you know, if you have like a baby, let's say, and like you're seeing like that baby grow and you're kind of like seeing the, you know, the changes over time, but then someone comes over to visit and they haven't seen that, you know, your kid in 2 months and it's like, oh my gosh, they've gotten so much bigger. Going back and like revisiting music sometimes is like that for me, where it's like the music that I really love, that I regularly listen to, that I go back all the time, I still enjoy it and I still hear new things. But if I go back and I listen to something that I haven't heard in 10 years that I was crazy into at the time, like just seeing that perspective, whether it's like, that didn't age so well, or maybe it did. It's like, man, this really stands up. Like just having that view to be able to like see like how I've changed and how the music either has or hasn't like remained something that I enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. I gotta pause 1 second because I think I think my microphone was picking up my speakers. I want to jump back to J Dilla and Donuts because, you know, this idea of focusing on lyrics versus focusing on music, that the Donuts album has been recommended, not a lot, but it is strongly recommended. Like it's highly regarded, which makes me very interested. And it also makes me interested from a point of view of, you know, when I do these reaction videos, I have the lyrics. And honestly, for me, I love lyrics and I love the story, but the lyrics in terms of reaction are kind of a crutch because it gives me something to lean on and pay attention to and more or less distract myself from the fact that I'm supposed to be reacting, because I don't feel like I feel like the average reaction channel is someone just going, oh yeah, you know, this is cool. And I don't really do that. Yeah. So Donuts is an interesting project because the idea of reacting to an instrumental sounds very challenging, but it also sounds like it would be a cool experience and just important for someone like me who cares about lyrics so much to go, no, you literally don't have any. You have to focus on the music, so focus on the music.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's, and I know you've mentioned it's obviously not quite the same, but I think you said you listen to like ambient music if you're just kind of like relaxing, just having it in the background. So,
Yeah.
you know, having that instrumental is there, but it's obviously like a much different experience than like sitting down and listening to a Kendrick or a Cole,
Right.
or someone who's a lot more lyrical. There's clearly something to pay attention to. Donuts is a cool one for me. So I got into to him from a, as a lot of the music, just sharing music with friends as far as what I'm listening to, what they're listening to. And as it turns out, I had heard J Dilla in some form or capacity for years because he's been making music since the 90s. With different artists, but he was never like a big name like out there. But he was always in the background and making them for pretty big artists.
Yeah.
But I think I came across that album. It was a little bit after he had passed. So I think he passed in 2006, and I think I first heard Donuts in like 2007. So right around there.
Okay.
And I couldn't tell you exactly what my first reaction was when I like first heard the album because I again was listening to a lot of different music, but I did find myself kind of keep coming back to it over and over. And it's all sample based, but it's not necessarily without words. It's just the words are in the samples. And I don't want to like spoil the project for like once you listen, but it's not just like, just purely instruments unless we're again talking about the voice as an instrument or kind of blends in the background. So it's still not like pull up the lyrics and read through this like long story, but to be able to like have some words in there, but it's all blending in with the music.
That's really
cool.
cool. I
Yeah.
didn't know that detail. That makes me a lot more interested in doing that
Yeah.
album.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like you can listen to it once and like it, and that's fine, but there are other like layers. It's like an onion. There are plenty of different layers you can pull back, whether it's like seeing where the samples came from and what were the original songs, and like did he just take a straight loop, or did he chop it up and make it something completely different, and then there's like the the meaning behind it, or again you can just listen to it once and that's it. So it's very much like what you latch on to. I think the part where I was excited is like some of the more recent albums that you've done, including the couple that are produced by Madlib or even Kenny Beats, like to see like without any prompting or really feeling like it didn't look like you were like forcing yourself or like, oh, I have to listen to the producer. It was just like naturally, just like there's something in there about the music. Like
Yeah.
you still enjoy, the lyrics and the rapper, but to have that production a little more in the foreground, a little bit more kind of catching attention. Um, yeah, I think if you like especially Madlib, I think you'll really like J Dilla.
Yeah, you probably have single-handedly put donuts into my rotation now, and in terms of coming up for a reaction, because that I didn't realize. I thought it was purely instrumental, which
Mhm.
which is cool. I'm fine with that. Like, did you listen to the instrumental version of the Unlocked with Kenny and Denzel?
Um, I don't remember if I did. I think they did like a remix album. So I think they did like Unlocked 1.5 or something like that. So I think I listened to that, but I don't think I heard the
Oh,
instrumental.
okay. You might check out the instrumental. It was pretty cool because the experience I had with it was obviously I had heard the version with Denzel Curry and his lyrics on there. And I listened to that probably 3 or 4 times. And then I didn't realize there was an instrumental version. And so I was
Mm,
driving one day. I was like, oh, I got to put that on. And it was just a complete game changer in how the whole album sounded because first of all, it was neat because I haven't had an experience yet where I can listen to just the producer and the music that they've made. There is that one track where it's kind of his solo where there isn't really any lyrics on it, and it's cool. So it was
mhm,
cool to hear what Kenny was actually doing. But then it blew me away of how much presence Denzel Curry's vocals have on the actual album. And when you take it away, it's a completely different experience, which gave me a lot more appreciation for Denzel Curry and what he was doing. And then I
mhm,
had another experience where, okay, here's the beats. Here's what Denzel Curry was working with. What would I put on top of it? If I was trying to put lyrics or anything on top of it, what would I put? And I mean, nothing was coming to mind because I'm not a rapper at all. But then
mhm.
it gave me even more appreciation for Denzel Curry's imagination and lyrical ideas to just drop it into these beats that don't have like a looped timing structure. Like there's all kinds of hesitations and skips and it was incredible. It was really incredible.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's cool to see that like, there have been albums where I've listened to like the instrumental version of it. The one that kind of comes to mind is so Madlib and J Dilla actually did an album together.
Oh, cool.
They called it J-Lib, and it's I feel like it's probably not one that you're going to react to, so I feel like spoilers probably aren't too bad of a thing.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'll listen to
um,
that on the side the same week I do donuts.
there you go. So basically, it was like Madlib originally just like came across like a beat tape that J Dilla had made. It was just the beats, fairly simple, and he rapped over it and like just released it online or something. And Dilla heard it, found out about it, wasn't like upset, but was like, hey, let's do an album. And they literally did like they would every other track like Dilla would make one beat and Madlib would rap over it, and Madlib made one track and Dilla would rap over it.
That's
But it
awesome.
wasn't in it. But they didn't do it in the studio.
Oh, no
It
kidding.
was
They sent
it
it to
was
each other?
I think Dilla was still living in Detroit at the time. He moved to LA later, which was closer to where Madlib was. Madlib is from SoCal, from Oxnard originally. I think he might be down in LA now, but from my neck of the woods. And so they were literally sending tapes back and forth, and then just recording over it.
That's
Not like
so
recording over, but
awesome.
like it was just like the two track. Here's the instrumental, and here's the vocal, and that was it.
Yeah. That
And
is
like they're both
awesome.
like and they're both pretty talented rappers, but they're both amazing producers. And so to like have them like you've mentioned a couple times like the idea of like playing music, like enjoying it, like not just having like this one thing that you're passionate about, but then sharing and like figuring out like a cool way to collaborate. Like that's one that I've listened to a lot. So I've heard that album I countless times, but then I've also listened to the instrumentals because again, like
Yeah.
I would say arguably is like the best part, with like the voice kind of being an added bonus. But the difference between like listening to like the instrumentals of that versus like listening to Donuts, or listening to like a lot of Madlib's projects where he's done kind of like the same energy, where like it's just a beat tape and maybe there's like, vocals that are coming from samples or TV shows, or all this different stuff. He has a lot of cool projects like that. It's a completely different experience, because you're not just hearing what the music would be, and then like, oh, and there's going to be some vocals there, but they're just not there yet, or they've been taken out. Like it's its own like work of art. And
Yeah.
people will take those instrumentals from like a Donuts or from something that Madlib has done, and just kind of take out the loop and then turn that into a song. But in its own right, it's like its own piece of work. It's not like, oh, this is almost there, it just needs the vocal. It's like, you
Yeah.
can, it's a lot different than just hearing the instrumental version, both of which are cool though.
That's really cool. That's real. I'm very interested in that. Yeah, I think the fans of Donuts and Jay Dilla they're gonna like you a lot, Tim, because you're single handedly putting this into my rotation right now.
Awesome.
It makes me think of the idea of, as listeners, some of us prefer hearing the music first, some of us prefer the lyrics. But man, when you flip it over and you think about the creator side of it, and you think about somebody who focuses on rapping but not necessarily beats, and the mindset they're in as they're either writing or not writing, if you're Jay-Z, and freestyling, however it is that they come to get their lyrical structure set. And then the other side of producing the beats. My wife is obsessed with Kenny Beats the Cave, the YouTube channel that you can watch, and it's so cool to watch that guy. These artists will walk into his little booth thing, and they'll just try and throw him all these crazy curveballs about what kind of sounds they want in the track, and he's like, okay, fine. They're trying to stump him more or less. But Kenny is so good at it, and it's so fun to watch him just go, okay, no, I got you. And it's almost like his own version of freestyle in a way, if that makes sense. Like he's got to come up with something on the fly. It's got to sound a certain way. It's got to capture a certain vibe. And then he's got to like chop it and slice it and move it and do all this other shit. And then he spits it out and here's this incredible beat. And I can't even imagine the kind of mindset that goes with something like that.
Right. And especially for someone who does like do a lot of sampling, Kenny included, like it's one of those where you start to appreciate, like, this isn't just a guy who like, okay, well, here's the instrument, like here's maybe like a few sounds on the computer, we're just going to throw it together. He's pulling out samples from like who knows how long he's had them. Like he's talked about like, he's had, I think he said he's like kept every like hard drive from every computer since like he first started making beats.
No
kind of
kidding.
Thing. And like, so he's got, sometimes he'll go back to that hard drive and find that sound, or that, that particular drum and stuff like that. And that's common in like the type of like the producers we're talking about, with like a Madlib or a J Dilla or a DJ Premier, all these other like crazy producers. It's not just like, oh, they know music and they can make something. It's like, no, they've got like thousands of records.
Yeah.
They're all organized in the way that like somehow like makes sense in their mind, which would make sense to no one else. And they know that exact drum loop or that exact sound, and they're just gonna like pull that out and go ahead and sample that and include it, and how they put it together. Some of like the best music is like, it seems effortless, but then you look into the amount of like work that goes into it, or like, oh, that just sounds like it's like a loop from this thing. They're just like, plagiarizing and copying this other thing. It's like, no, like you listen to like what they did and made it sound so good that it sounded like it didn't take any effort, but you see like the work behind it, like it just adds a whole nother layer to what you're listening to.
Yeah. My wife and I have been watching the Hip Hop Evolution on Netflix, and last night we watched the episode where it was talking about Jay Dilla and the super producers. Who was the other guy out of the South? Oh, I can't remember his name right now. DJ Screw was one of them.
Oh yeah.
And then there was another guy too, Spanish Fly. Anyway, when they were talking about Jay Dilla, it was neat how they specifically said, kind of like what you're talking about, how his beats were just a little different in that they weren't like this mechanical, precise timing thing. They were a little bit looser, a little bit of skirting the edges of the timing, and it just had a more of a free form to it rather than like this rigid, looped timing box that exists within a computer. Not that he was necessarily using computers, but sometimes I get a little nitpicky with some of the beats that I hear, because it's just like, this is clearly just looped timing sequence, and you know it can sound fine, and maybe sometimes that even works really well. But you get somebody like J Dilla, or I always think of Aphex Twin. Aphex Twin, man, he did the same thing with all these electronic sounds where, like, yeah, there is a beat in there somewhere, and there is a timing in there somewhere, but it's almost just a mess of all this stuff on top of it. But it still works somehow. And it's like, I try and put myself into that mind space of, because I can listen to it and it barely makes sense.
Yeah.
So for somebody to have created it in their mind and then make it come out is just a total mind warp for me.
Right. Yeah. And on top of that, like, you know, so one of the things that I like was coming across in like some of like the documentaries and like some of like the behind the scenes stuff, like hearing about like his process, is he would just like throw on a record and spend that time like cleaning his studio, like listen to the whole thing, you know, flip it over,
Yeah.
you know, go through, kind of dust everything off. And then at the end, he would go back and he would go to the exact part of the song that he wanted to sample, grab exactly what he wanted, put it together. And the making of the beat was like 15 minutes,
Wow.
like from beginning to end. But it was, again, like he's creating this whole thing in his mind. So at that point, it's not creating here. It's here's the entire project. Now I just have to put it down using whatever equipment he was using, whether it's the drum machines, the samplers, you know, pulling from a sample or all of that stuff. And then, like you said, like having the, you know, the timing where like some things just, it sounds a little wrong, but it sounds like, it sounds like a person made it. You
A
know,
person made it,
to
exactly.
it's not snapped to this like 4 beats and everything's got to line up just on that. You know, the 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, there's a little bit of a swing back and
Yeah.
forth, and it almost sounds like, you know, a live drummer instead of you know, maybe it still sounds like a beat machine, but it's being played by a person. And which is cool because like having something like that, if everything was like that, it wouldn't be that special. But the fact that other music is a little bit more like precise or a little bit more structured, having something that's a little bit out of the norm, even if it's just like literally like a fraction of a second just off the beat, you know, having that thing that kind of keeps you on your toes, or it's a little unexpected, or it sounds a little different, even if you can't quite place why. Like, you know, having all of that, like the variety is like I mean, that's my thing in life in general. Like, if I go to a restaurant, I'm not ordering the same thing every time. I'll, you know,
Right.
try something new. I want to like yeah, I like that, and I'll come back to that at some point. But like I want to hear this other thing and this other twist. So with music, like having that like variety and having all of these different options, like anytime that I ever feel like I'm getting like stuck in my hole, like, oh, this is the music that I like and that's not the good stuff. It's like, no, just like be a little bit more open, be a little more fluid. Like you don't have to like you don't have to shit on something else in order
Yeah.
to enjoy the things that you like. You know,
Right.
there's music that I listen to that I don't take that seriously, and then there's stuff that I'm like, yeah, no, I'm going to listen to these lyrics all the way through because I know there's a message there. It's all about like a time and a place with a lot of that stuff. So having someone who is willing to kind of push those boundaries is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, and like what you're talking about with some of these like little slight off timings, you know, it's almost like a version of audio texture, you know? Like if you just paint a wall and it's nice and smooth, you go, okay, like, but as soon as you start adding these little textures and stuff, it completely changes the experience of, you know, the painting or whatever it is that you're doing. Have you seen, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's a specific channel, or maybe it's not necessarily a channel, but a certain type of video, but it's these beat makers, these producers. And what they do is they go into a record shop, somebody puts a blindfold on them, and they grab like 3 or 4 random records, and then
Yeah.
okay, here's the records, and then they take them back to their lab and they chop them up and make a brand new beat out of just completely random records.
I have seen that. Yeah, I think it is a specific channel. Like maybe there's been a couple versions of it. I want to say maybe it was Hip Hop DX, but I'm not positive
Oh,
on that.
that sounds right. That sounds right.
Yeah,
Something like that.
it, it was definitely like a YouTube series, and so yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen like versions of that exact concept or something that are like, you know, kind of similar. But yeah, to be able to see that process and like maybe, you know, it's not going to turn into like their biggest hit. Like obviously they're just like, you know,
Right.
fooling around, but to be able to see like this is a thing that they could do with any record in there. You know, it's they just happen to pick that one.
It's incredible.
So
Someone sent me
yeah.
too when I was doing the Dark Twisted Fantasy reaction afterward. They sent me just a quick little like minute video where it's the sample that they used for Devil in a New Dress.
Hmm.
It's the vocal sample, but like they spliced 5 seconds from this part of the song, like 4 seconds from this part of the song, and like 6 seconds from this part of the song, rearranged it and made a new audio. And it's just like when you were talking about Jay Dilla, how he would put on a record and go cleaning his studio while he's listening to it, and he's more or less assembling his sample in his head while listening to the music. I can't comprehend that, because if I'm listening to a song, I have a really hard time inserting a different song into my head. Like if I'm listening to Tool and someone says, say the lyrics to your favorite Alice in Chains song, it's like a logjam. My brain just goes, no, I can't do that. These are conflicting bits of data. I cannot have one song in my head and think of another song at the same time. It just doesn't work. So for him to do that is absolutely mind blowing to me.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And I'm nowhere close to like where his mind was, but like if anything, like I have kind of like almost like the opposite experience of you. It's hard for me to keep only one song in my head at a time.
Oh, really?
And there are definitely times where, there is just like one, but like a lot of the times I'm like thinking of like, oh, and this kind of reminds me of this other thing from this other song. And like the beat kind of matches up a little bit, or, it's a little bit similar. And I already kind of had like that mindset a little bit, especially once I started listening to mixes, whether it was like hip hop mixes, or I listened to a lot of electronic music, or even like dance or house music, like hearing like, okay, well, here's these two completely different songs. And then here's how you either like totally mash them up into like one piece, or maybe just like how you transition from one song to another, and like hearing that and like starting to build like some of that in my head a little bit. And then somewhere around in like, I want to say it was like 2008, like I bought like a decent MacBook, and, now I had GarageBand, and, I could kind of play around with like, making some music. And then eventually I downloaded some DJ software. I basically learned how to use those two things like overnight.
Oh, wow.
Because I was already doing it in my head a little bit. And so now it was just like, here's the tool that I can actually like put this down and put it out into the world. Not like, I never really did anything with it or got into like professional or anything, but just as a hobby to kind of put that together. Like I think I literally like downloaded the software for like DJing one night, and the very next day then like basically played a mix at my sister's birthday party.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool.
And like, and like obviously not like, super sharp. I definitely got better at it over time, but to have that, like the ability to take something that I was already kind of hearing and actually be able to put it out there was definitely kind of a cool step.
Yeah.
And just have that just be like the very beginning of what it takes to accomplish like what all these other producers and DJs are doing, like just to have like a little bit of scratching the surface of what that's like was definitely a cool experience. And if anything, just like buried me deeper into the whole, like appreciating the music, appreciating the instrumentals and how all that's put together. And it doesn't just sound like the same as everything else that's out there.
Yeah, that's wild. I downloaded, I don't know, a couple months ago, like what it's called, FL Studio, I think.
Oh yeah, Fruity Loops.
Yeah, that's it. And I was like, cool, I'll check this out. And I did. I watched like an hour tutorial and how to do it and this and that. And like I kind of got a little understanding, and I was like, I have no idea. Cool, I can make this little loop thing, do what, and it was like this. I am awful at this. There's nothing coming out of my brain at all. I have no idea what I want it to sound like. Like there's just like a barren desert.
Yeah.
But if you flip it, if you get into writing, because I enjoy writing, I haven't done any lately, but I've been writing for a long time. I love writing. And my brother-in-law and I will go back and forth a bit and argue, because he does programming, and he likes programming rather than just language, because it's either right or it's wrong. Like if you write a code, it's going to work or it's going to break. But language is obviously very different. You can write the same sentence 100 different ways, and who knows which is the best way. Everyone's going to have a different opinion. And that's what I like about writing, is it's very subjective. And through that subjectivity, you can get your own voice and have your own style, and people can pick up on, like, I think it was Stephen King, when he had gotten big, at one point he created a new pen name, because he was like, well, was it a fluke, or I'm actually kind of decent at writing? And people figured out, hey, that's Stephen King. Like it wasn't his name, but he basically got outed because of his style and the way he writes. And he even tried to change his style a little bit, but people still figured out it was him.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that just you know, some people are into different creative aspects, and you can take someone who's incredibly creative and take them out of their creative space and put them into a different creative space, and it's just like nothing comes out of it, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, it is kind of interesting. Like that actually kind of reminds me a little bit of like how like there are some producers where if you hear a song they've produced, but it's one you haven't heard before, there are some that you know like almost immediately, oh, this is probably by so and so. Like,
Right.
and sometimes it's something like a DJ tag that's obviously going to give it away, but like saying the actual name of the DJ. But the one that kind of comes to mind is DJ Premier. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all.
He does a lot of the record scratching, right?
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
that. And so he like he got his big start, or at least like that I'm aware of, with Gangstar. I don't know if you're familiar with
I
Gangstar.
haven't done that one yet. No.
So it was basically him and then Guru is the rapper. So it's just the the classic DJ and rapper combo. And so like his sound over the years, like if you listen to his stuff, like it's all completely different. It's not like, oh, it's the exact same drums, it's the exact same thing, but there's something about like how he puts his beats together, um, that just like you either automatically know, or like as soon as you hear it, you're like, oh, of course it's him. Like, that sounds exactly
Yeah.
like his style without sounding repetitive, or it's just the same thing that he made on the last thing. Having that ability to have like a style that is like recognized, where like even if you don't know it's Stephen King, like you kind of still know it's Stephen King. Like there's something to that style where it's like, nah, it's either someone trying to be that person or it actually is that person.
Right. I had the same experience once with the Crystal Method. I don't know if you listen to electronic music, techno.
Yeah, I haven't got deep into their discography, but I'm familiar. Yeah.
I had put on some every now and then. I'll put on something from a streaming services, like, you know, recommended for you, or like a radio station. It's like, oh, here's stuff you haven't listened to much yet that you'll probably like. Okay, threw it on,
Hmm.
listen to it, cool. And then one track comes on, I'm like, God, this sounds like Crystal Method.
Mm.
But I was like, it can't be, because I've heard all their stuff. Well, it turns out they had done a soundtrack to like a movie or a game or something, and I didn't know that the soundtrack existed. And I was like, no shit, yeah, it's Crystal Method.
Nice.
And just the, like you're saying, it really surprised me that here I'm listening to electronic music, and I feel like on the surface it would be like, well, you know, it all sounds the same, right? Which is stupid. That doesn't apply really to music at all. It's just something that if you don't pay attention, it all sounds the same. But
Right.
that I could pick up on a style of electronic music from a group I've known, not even knowing it was them, because somehow that signature sound came through. Whatever it was, I couldn't tell you what it was, but it did. It came through.
Yeah, and so I think it taps into like the way that my mind works a little bit, and especially like the way that I've like continued to like reinforce that with how I consume music, is just like this web of like here's like this kind of sound is either influenced by, or maybe they were involved with the production and then they worked with this other person and this other, like that's how I like discovered a huge amount of like the music that I listened to. And I think why I kept coming back to the producers is like, okay, well, I've heard this rapper and I really like them, and like maybe here's a couple of the artists that they've worked with, but like how do I find more? And like then like
Yeah.
saying, okay, well, here's the producer that made that track, or did this whole album, and then they've produced this other stuff, and then basically just like spider webbing out. And like like one of those, like you can literally like nowadays they have it as an app where it's like, if you like this artist, click here, and then like here's these other artists that you might like, and if you like that one, then you click on that, and it like keeps speeding off, and is supposed to like show you then like you were saying, like with curated playlists, it's like here's other music that like you'll probably like but maybe not have listened to, and just like piecing all that together. Like when we're having like a conversation like this, or if I'm talking to someone else about like music, it's hard for me to like just to feel like I'm going to talk about this one topic and this one artist and this one thing, because I like the way I see it is like it's all linked to this all other stuff, whether it's
Yeah.
literally that person worked with that other person, or they were influenced by, or seeing like where hip hop started and how it's evolved over the years, and kind of blossomed into like this cultural phenomenon that came from basically you could say exactly like almost like the month and like the neighborhood where it was originating from.
Oh,
Like
that's
this
cool.
isn't like one of those like things where it's like classical music being around forever, and rock music like being pretty well documented, but not as heavily, as opposed to like something where it's like, yeah, it basically started in like the very beginning of the 80s, like late 70s, early 80s, and here's how it started, and it was simple, and it was people just like working with what they had, and then like it started spreading, and like all these different like geographic areas, just like seeing like all of that coming back to like kind of what we were talking about earlier, like that passion and like I want to like share this with everyone, like look how cool this thing is. Like, no, pull back a little bit, like I've had at this point a couple of decades to process all of this and put it together. So like getting someone to like figure it out their first day or in the first month, like give people time to kind of have their experience. It doesn't have to be the same as mine. Be able to kind of share it in the right location. I'm not going to try to like give you another 20 albums to react to because you've already got enough of a list. But to be able to then talk about, okay, well, here's what people are talking about, and here's what that has meant to me, and here's why I think it's cool, and like now kind of the ball is in their court to be able to figure out like if they're interested in it or if they have a different experience with it. So being able to take that passion, that enjoyment of music, and to be able to actually like pass it on instead of just then turning into like someone who's just like super specific or a little bit elitist, or like, oh, that's not the real hip hop, you've got to listen to these others. Like it's like, no, like sometimes you want to listen to some party music, sometimes you want to listen to something a little more serious, sometimes you want to be upset, like like basically having like mood music is another big thing for me. Like I'm not always in the mood for something, and sometimes that means like I'm not going to listen to this other album that I've already heard before because I'm not in the mood for that. But then I have to be careful too, because there's been like artists or albums that I haven't like given a chance because of whatever space I was in, whether I just wasn't in the right headspace for it, or I was just like not really listening to that genre very much. When Kendrick first came out, or rather when he first kind of like got big, like I wasn't like heavy into like the hip hop side or the underground side. I'd gotten a lot more into like electronic music of various sorts, and was still listening to rap, but wasn't really like, I was kind of doing the whole like, oh, like the new stuff isn't that good, I like the old stuff, it's better in this way. And but then I would go and actually listen to them, as opposed to like, oh, it's newer hip hop, therefore I don't like most of the stuff that's coming out. I was like, no, let me give this a chance. Why are people listening to this? And then kind of really getting into it. He's obviously like one of the best rappers ever. Like, I'm not, this isn't breaking news or anything, but some sort of mental block in my head, like, was just like, oh, I like the stuff that I like. But eventually I came around to it and really enjoyed it. Kind of a similar experience with Frank Ocean. I had heard like some of his stuff from like his first album, but I remember when Blonde came out, like, I think I listened to it like the first night, but it didn't click with me for some reason. And I think that was because I had been listening to a lot of electronic music, a lot more like up tempo, like something with a beat, which half of his songs barely have any drums on it at all. So I just like the slight like chipmunk voice at the beginning kind of threw me off, and just like little stuff like that. It's like I just didn't get it. I wasn't in the right headspace for it. And then going back and listening to it, like, it's an amazing album.
Oh, it's incredible.
It absolutely lives up to the hype. But I just wasn't quite in the right spot. I wasn't quite in the right headspace, but kind of coming around to it. So then kind of keeping that mindset around if there's other music where I'm like, I don't know if it's for me, like, give it a chance. Like, kind of reach out, figure it out. Like, you don't have to like everything, but, basically just don't spend the time and energy, like not liking it. Or like, or oh, someone said it was this way, or oh, if you like, if you don't like this, just go into it with an open mind, just listen, have the experience you're going to have, and then kind of focusing on the positive instead of just like, I'm going to like tear down what someone else is passionate about because it's not real music to me. Like, kind of coming back to the whole like gatekeeping a little bit, but again, trying not to internalize the gatekeeping a little bit too. As far as restricting like, what I'm okay with listening to, or is something a guilty pleasure, or is it just music that I'm listening to? Like,
I think, when you're talking about mood music and being in the right mood for something, I feel like that is often a barrier for me when it comes to trying to find new music on my own. Because when you're in a certain mood for something, oh, I can listen to this, I can listen to this. Like, where you can go to get that feeling from.
Right.
But if you're in a certain mood and you're like, man, I want to listen to something new, but you're in a specific mood, I always feel like that's all of a sudden it's a wall that shoots up because it's like, well, I'd like to listen to something new, but I'm in a specific mood, and so I'm probably not going to like it because the chances of it existing in that like bandwidth are a little low, you know? And
Right.
and so
Yeah,
then I'm
it's
like,
almost like a gamble. Yeah.
yeah, and then I'm like, well, okay, well then I'm not going to like it. But then I think, like you're saying, well, am I not going to like it because it isn't good, or am I not going to like it because I'm in the wrong headspace? You know,
Right.
and so often I'll find myself, not too often, but there's times when I'll be on, Tidal, and I'm like, I want to listen to something new. I want to listen to something new. What? Well, I don't know. I haven't heard it. It's all new. Well,
Right.
pick something that you've been thinking of. Well, but I'm not going to like that. Based off of what? You haven't even listened to it.
Right.
Like, how do you know you're not going to like it? Well, I don't know, but it's just all of a sudden this wall shoots up in my brain, and it's really strange that happens. I did want to ask you
Yeah.
one question, because you're clearly into the musical side of this, and so what are your feelings on Playboi Carti and Whole Lotta Red and that just style of sound? What do you think about that?
So that's an interesting one. I think he was definitely like one of those that like I fell into the whole like, oh, it's like something different and something new. It doesn't really mean anything. Like almost similar to like how like mumble rap kind of like got its like names, like whatever that actually means. But again, kind of just somehow got lumped into some sort of like a, oh, like that's just like if you're like in high school, like maybe like you want to rage and like something like that, breaking out of that headspace. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know exactly what your audience's ages are, but I would guess I'm probably a lot older than the average, at least,
older than the
like
average. Yeah, yeah,
mid 30s instead of coming out of like teenage years. But I did at some point like kind of basically just the repetition of like, okay, enough people are listening to this. There must be something there. Even if it's not going to be my favorite thing, at least kind of listen to it. It's still not my favorite, but I definitely appreciate it a lot more as far as like being able to like go into it with an open mind of like, okay, the energy is there, the sounds, there's something intriguing there. There's some
yeah,
sort of like an energy. Um, it's still not one that I would go back and listen to all the time, but I'm glad that I did,
yeah.
and I'm glad that I'll throw it on. And I think I've probably heard that album like maybe two or three times all the way through.
That was an interesting one to me because it's this weird combination of like just loud, distorted bass and beats, and then these light, plunky, like electronica sounds.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I like on one hand, it's so strange because I love loud and distorted, and I love light electronica sounds too, but it's like people who don't want to mix their food together. Like, no, these need to be separate. This doesn't touch this. This has to be separate. Otherwise, I don't like it. It's gross. But
Yeah.
those two being blended together, and then with Playboi Carti's weird vocal, like almost like a harsh rasp ad lib sound going on, it was just like like there's a burger place, a brewery that we went to, and they have a PB&J burger. And I tried it once. I'm like, there's no fucking way this is gonna taste good, man. There's no way. I mean, I think I had it one time because it was just this big old sloppy mess. But I was like, wow, this actually works. This works,
Right.
and it's surprising. And then the Whole Lot of Red was the same kind of thing. Like it pushed me lyrically because I just hadn't heard vocals used in that way. But the sound too was just this really cool mix of something I thought would never ever really mix before.
Right. And it's not necessarily like a burger you're going to go back and like order every single time you're there, but it sounds like you're glad you at least tried it. And
I
it's like the
liked
same
it.
the same concept with like the music where it's like it doesn't have to be the album that becomes your most listened to, or
Right.
you can listen to it once or twice and
Yep.
and that be it. But at least giving things a chance. And if you're not going to like trying to like hold back on the like, oh, and I'm still going to have an opinion on it. I'm still going to like try to tell someone else that like they shouldn't enjoy it. Like that's the part I really try to pull back. And it's like everyone's got their taste, and their tastes are right for them. And if I can share something with them and they can share something with me, even better. But
Yeah.
instead of like focusing on like figuring out how to convince someone else that they shouldn't like the things they like, that's where it kind of just turns into being an asshole instead of like being a music fan who's sharing what they appreciate.
Yeah, and that is an unfortunate aspect for whatever reason. And as far as I can tell, that exists across all the musical genres. Like, I know people who like classic rock, they don't want to get into modern rock. I know people, there's the old hip hop heads that don't want to listen to the new shit. There's the old school Metallica fans that hate Load and Reload. And, there's just everything. For whatever reason, you can find these clusters of people who just cling tightly to their precious gems, and then that's it. Like nothing
Yeah.
else for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I think, and I definitely understand like kind of where it comes from, and I think I've fallen into that pattern. I've had to like purposely break myself out of that like several times. Like I remember hearing people talking that way about like, oh, like the old stuff was better when I first started getting into hip hop, which was right around like 99, 2000,
Oh,
like
okay.
starting out with just like what was on the radio, and then eventually kind of like growing from there. And so like hearing that, but then, 5 years later, I'm listening to, stuff that I like, and then hearing something that new coming out and already starting to feel that way a little bit of like, oh, well, that's not as good as that thing. It's like, is it really that different? Is the music that was coming out in 2005 really, crappy, but the music that was coming out in 99 was so much better? Or was, the music 5 years before that better? It's like, no, it's just like a musical journey. It's just like seeing like it grow. And if it's not for you, then cool, move on. But instead of focusing on like, oh well, like now my taste is set, now it's cemented in. It's like, no, like keep an open mind, like be willing to listen to new stuff, because every album that we're talking about as far as like being a great project was new at some point.
Yeah.
And having that mindset when that particular album came out just means you're not open to what was potentially like your favorite project. So I
Yeah.
think like that's I think probably like the best advice that I would give like to anyone else who's like probably a lot younger than I am, like of like just always kind of like keep that in mind of like there's always something new, there's always something older, like the stuff that you like, be open to new stuff. If it's not for you, then don't sweat it. But like instead of like getting locked into whatever it is that you like, just being a little more flexible that way.
Yeah. Well, and it is an interesting combination too, or a duality that sometimes exists, it seems like, because especially with a group or an artist that you really like, and they're going to come out with a new album and people get all excited. Oh man, that's my favorite, whoever. I hope it sounds like this. And then I sometimes think, well, but do you? Because that already exists. And so do you really want them to do something that they've already made? Because you already have that. And if they do something that's just like that, how new is it? Is it really worth the wait? There are certain bands that I listen to, and, when they come out with a new album, we go, well, I know what it's going to sound like. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you're into that sound, then cool. But sometimes I think it's also very important for that musical evolution, like Tyler, the Creator. I mean, if you listen to Goblin and then you listen to Call Me If You Get Lost, you're probably not going to think it's the same artist. Like, it's just incredibly different, the evolution that has occurred. And, I'm a big Tool fan. Their most recent album came out 13 years after the one they had released before that. I mean, that's almost a lifetime in the musical world, 2 lifetimes, depending on where you're coming from. Yet, those guys managed to kink out some of the best songs I've ever heard, ever. Like, literally, my all-time favorite song comes off of that album. And so, yeah, it is weird to think that sometimes people will get locked into, like, this is what I know and this is what I want. But if you never leave that bubble, there's all this incredible stuff. Like, 6 months ago, my wife and I had never listened to Kanye, and now we're listening to Kanye all the time because he's got incredible music, and it's like we would have never heard it otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. But and I think you even addressed like this like kind of earlier on in your journey, like you had heard of Kanye.
Yeah,
You
heard
knew
of
things
him. Yeah.
about Kanye, not a lot, but you hear like a little like, oh, here's like this new scandalous thing, here's this new news story, or something like that, but not understanding like the art behind it. Like it doesn't completely negate like if like that person is doing a certain thing or acting a certain way, but like at least understanding what's behind it, understand like the art that's coming out of it, instead of just like falling into the whole like, well, like I've heard bad things, so
Yeah,
I'm just gonna
right.
keep living my life like not listening.
Oh, shit. Well, Tim, if you can believe it or not, we're 57 minutes in. That was a fast hour. That was a fast hour. That
Yeah.
was cool, though. Um, So do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to do to just kind of wrap up our whole conversation? I feel like this was a great conversation, but anything you want to close with here?
Um, yeah, trying to think of anything specific. Like I said, it's one of those where like I could go off on tangents all day. So like trying to like avoid like getting like a little bit too cloudy there.
I
So I
keep
guess kind of
picturing
coming
I,
back.
I keep picturing that meme, that Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme, where the guy's like pointing at the board and all the things are going on all over the place.
That literally crossed my mind. I was like, it's either that or a spider web. Like at that point, like just like having that involvement. But I think like the thing that I've kind of learned, coming back a little bit to kind of what we had talked about earlier, as far as like me seeing like your journey going through it and like picking up on lyrics on first listen that I wasn't even necessarily, picking up on right away, or maybe even ever like having that experience. There's like a little bit of like a, not a jealousy, but like, oh man, I wish I could have that too. Cause like, it's not as if I'm like, I'm going to just listen to the music. And if I happen to hear some words, like I kind of wish like my mind could pick up on some stuff like that. But instead of like focusing on that part of feeling like, oh, like I'm missing out, or I'm not, like, my experience is my experience.
Yeah,
It's just as valid. Like
yeah,
I can make an effort to like reach out and try to understand things beyond what I already know. But I also don't have to feel like, oh, and I'm doing it wrong, I'm not listening to it the right way. Like just having like, conversations like this, or, watching a reaction channel, or sharing music with, people in person, like that is like, that's like my outlet. That's how I am able to appreciate it. That's how I'm able to hear the lyrics, watching you or John Denton or Turning the Tables, or like any of these people, like
yeah.
completely different people, totally different experiences, listening to the same music, hearing their thoughts in real time, or, hearing their summaries after the fact and be like, man, yeah, it's a good point. I never really thought of it that way. Or, just having that, like that to me is like half the fun of music.
I love it.
There's like the solo experience and all of that, and like I'm very much, I've listened to it and it's like a ton of different music, so like that's a heavy aspect of it. But being able to like have that experience, especially like now I'm not like in school and like just always around people where it's just like easy to listen to music like together. Like, I'm busy working and, live in states away from people that I might have had those conversations with. But to have this community, or have the ability to like re-listen to something for the first time through someone else's ears is definitely kind of a cool experience. So yeah, I would just encourage people to kind of like keep an open mind, always kind of like be willing to listen to someone else's, side of the story, and don't feel like you've got to like force your version or anything like that. I think there's a lot of echo chambering happening in the world, and like obviously social media being like a huge aspect of it. But like,
Yeah,
even outside of that, like it's easy to surround yourself with people who just think the same way as you, or enjoy the same things that you do, and that's totally fine. Like, clubs and groups and channels like this
right.
are
Yeah,
perfect for that. But just kind of remember there is more out in the world. There is other stuff, and like push your boundaries just a little bit more, because there's a ton of music. I mean, in the last 15 years that I would have basically completely discounted if I like didn't keep like trying to like break myself out of that, like that level of comfort of like, here's where I am, here's the stuff that I like, and I'm tired and I don't want to do anything else now, so that's it. you know and I'm also like in a situation where like, I didn't have kids young, and anything like that, or I wasn't like busy and like didn't have time to, I was able to like treat this as a hobby basically.
yeah,
So I think just being able to appreciate, all of the music out there, or at least give it a chance. And it's almost like with a religion, like you want to be able to like question your beliefs,
yeah,
and either that changes your mind or it reinforces it,
yeah.
versus like, oh no, I'm not gonna like even ask the questions. It's like almost like the same idea with music, is like I don't want to lock myself in. I want to be able to question like, why do I like this, and what do I like about it, and like what does that then lead me to? Because the only person that it hurts if I close myself off is me.
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
I'm just trying to
Yep. Yep.
just trying to just trying to keep that open mind, and just keep
Yeah.
enjoying a lot of new stuff.
And I would say too, with what you're talking about, as music progresses forward, the younger, us older generation, we have to like, okay, go trudging along into the new stuff sometimes. I think the younger
Yeah.
generation also needs to realize there's some shit that came out 50 years ago that is absolutely amazing, man. Absolutely amazing. Like every
Hmm.
now and then I'll think about the fact that, because for generally speaking, my audience is younger. I
Yeah.
think to myself, well, there's probably all kinds of people who have literally never heard Stairway to Heaven. And I just like, I can't even process that. Like, it's one of the most epic, iconic, classic rock songs of all time ever. You know, I was talking to a person who had not listened to Dark Side of the Moon. And I was just like, that's like, I can't even, like, you've never even been to the planet before. Like, what are you talking about? How could you? But I have to remember, I mean, we're getting to the point now where a lot of people were born after 9/11, and it's like, that's mind blowing, you know? And so just in that regard of, you know, especially when you're young, it is fun how you just get so insanely into music and you get hooked into your own thing. And then, yeah, it slowly turns into that, like, oh, this new shit's coming out. Maybe I'm into it. Maybe I'm not. But I remember being young and thinking, oh, I don't want to listen to the old stuff. Like, that's not very good. Because it's just, for whatever reason, it's older, and so you just discount it. But I still remember when I went back and started listening to the old Metallica albums, like Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets and Justice for All and all that. I was like, holy shit, man. No wonder there's all these Metallica fans running around. And then no wonder they don't like the Black Album, because the Black Album's totally different from the rest of this stuff. And expand the boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we could all get after you about, like, what do you mean you haven't heard Wu-Tang? But then, you know, seeing you react to it just in the last couple of days, you know, and seeing how much you enjoyed it, like, the right time to listen to it was right then.
That's a perfect example.
You know, don't feel like you've got to go back and, like, listen to, like, hundreds of albums all at once. Like, I can only imagine, like, how, like, you know, how long your list is and all of that.
Massive.
Like, you know, and it's all these, like, passionate people. Oh, if you like this, you got to listen to that. And again, like, I fall into that for sure. But, like, we got to, like, learn to almost like just kind of let you do your thing. Like, it's all going to kind of come naturally, and, you know, you'll find the appreciation when you get to it. And that's about it.
And hopefully, if things go well, hopefully this will turn into my job, because right now I'm doing it on the side. It might not seem like it, because I've been putting out a shit ton of videos lately, kind of on accident, honestly, but it would be nice to have more time to spend on doing more reactions so that I could do like 2 a week. That would be awesome if I could do 2 a week, but I also have to be careful not to burn myself out. So
yeah.
Well, 105, that's a good time. Tim, it was great talking to you, man. That was a lot of fun. That was really cool, because you coming from the musical side, that was great. It was great to hear. It's great to explore that space and stuff. And I thank you for coming on. And for everybody watching, we'll see you next week.
Cool.